My involvement with Wingate University, Wingate College it was then, began with a notice in the Biblical Recorder. The Biblical Recorder was a newsletter that was published by the North Carolina Baptist Association. Wingate had apparently placed in the Biblical Recorder a form for nominations for members of the Board of Trustees. We were attending First Baptist Church in Seagrove, and the interim minister at First Baptist Church in Seagrove was Reverend Lail Bob Hughes. Reverend Hughes had been a pastor at Oak First Baptist Church in Asheboro for many, many years. He had retired. First Baptist Church in Seagrove had a vacancy and called him as an interim pastor, which normally is a temporary assignment or engagement. Reverend Bob wound up staying there for 9 years. He was a great pastor, a great friend, and a great dedicated Christian minister. At any rate, Reverend Bob had seen this form in the Biblical Recorder, and unbeknownst to me, he had filled it in with a recommendation or nomination for me and sent it in to Wingate. The first that I knew of it was when the chairman of the board at Wingate called me and began asking me questions and determining whether or not I was what they were looking for or qualified, and whether I was interested in doing it. I agreed to accept the position, and a few weeks later went to an orientation program that they held at Caraway and began to learn what the responsibilities of a trustee at Wingate College was. A little bit after that, Wingate changed from a college to a university, which meant that they had added a significant number of doctoral programs, which is the usual qualification to be considered a university. The president of Wingate at that time was a Dr. Paul Courts. The Courts family were well known across North Carolina. One of Paul's brothers was the pastor at Calvary Baptist Church in Winston-Salem. His brother Tom had been the president at Wingate College for a number of years and had moved on to Samford University in Alabama, and later on became the head of the community colleges in Alabama. And Paul had followed him at Wingate. They had, I believe, 2 other brothers. I know one of them at least was a medical doctor. Not sure about the other. At that time, their parents were still living, so it was quite a notable family, certainly in Baptist circles. I began attending meetings at Wingate, trustee meetings. I think they had one every quarter, but I'm not real certain on that memory. But at any rate, we met at that point in what was called the Seagrove building, which was the administrative building at Wingate. Wingate had been established by a Baptist group in Union County in the late 1890s. I believe 1897 was when they were established as Wingate School. It had moved along and become a junior college somewhere along the line, and then I believe in 1976 or 77, it moved from a junior college to a 4-year college. So it had not been a 4-year college for very long when I joined the board. Probably need to check those dates, but that's my memory of it right now. The term of service was you served 4 years, and then you were on sabbatical for a year. So I guess I spent the first 4 years getting to know everybody and knowing what what went on at Wingate. I had certainly some experience with school, having attended Guilford for a long time, 7 years, and I also had some experience at RCC as an instructor, but a lot of what went on at Wingate was sort of totally new to me. I found the group of people that were on the board of trustees to be quite interesting and very friendly. One particular individual that was outstanding, I thought, was Mr. W.T. Harris. Mr. Harris was a co-founder of the Harris Teeter grocery chain in Charlotte and around over the Carolinas. They had been quite successful. They had sold it to a family group in Charlotte, and I don't have the name of that group on the Ruddick group, I believe. We need to check that. Mr. Harris was quite a character. He was originally a farm boy from Georgia. I'm not sure exactly how he came to Charlotte. I don't remember him ever telling that story, but one story that he loved to tell was about how he and his partner, somewhere in the scope of their business, decided to go up and talk to the gentleman who had founded the Food Line and in Salisbury, that was a fairly small store at that time also, and they went up, tried to convince him to merge with them, sort of looked down on him as being a smaller fish in a big pond. And Mr. Harris told that to sort of illustrate how you never want to get to where you feel like you're better than someone else. He said that the gentleman who founded Food Line just sort of laughed at him and grew right on by. Food Line obviously was by that time much, much larger than Harris Teeter. There were two different types of stores, obviously. Harris Teeter was considered a high-end grocery store, and Food Line always advertised. If you recall their history, their advertisement was the lowest prices in North Carolina, South Carolina, I think, something like that. Had that message on their trucks that traveled around over North Carolina. But Mr. Harris was quite a character. He was a very dominant character on that board. He had been on the board for quite a long time. He had given a lot of money to Wingate and had connections that brought in a lot of additional money. Wingate had really struggled, I guess, during the Depression. One of their students was a gentleman by the name of Jesse Helms. And Jesse Helms, of course, grew up in Monroe. And when he was a young man, he went to Wingate. Senator Helms would tell the story about how people traded chickens and molasses and anything else they could possibly monetize to pay their room and board and tuition at Wingate. But Senator Helms was also very favorable towards Wingate because that is where he got a start. He went from there, I guess, to Wake Forest, as did many. And by the way, the name Wingate came from a gentleman who was a professor at Wake Forest back in the turn of the century when Wingate was formed. And the relationship was somewhat close between the Baptist colleges. There were either 5 or 6 colleges. By that time, I believe that Wake Forest had already pretty much severed their ties with the Baptist State Convention and were somewhat independent. Obviously, Wake Forest was a much higher rated school, a much more expensive school to attend, and had a tremendous amount of money pumped into it by the Reynolds organization when it moved from Wake Forest, the town, to Winston-Salem in the 1950s. Wingate was beginning to become much more of that kind of school, certainly not on the same level as Wake Forest, but they were really sincere and businesslike in their approach to making it a better school. And in my first 4 years on the board, I saw a good bit of change. They were architecturally, they were building a new administration building and doing work on dormitories, classrooms, and considering what other programs that they needed to initiate. At the end of 4 years, I think this occurred in my first 4 years. A couple of the people, including Mr. Harris and Dr. Courts and the chairman of the board, came up with the idea of changing the name of Wingate to include Cannon. Now, the Cannon family, through the years of the Depression and even later times, had pumped a lot of money, had donated a lot of money to Wingate. They had a significant influence on the school over the years. Mr. Charlie Cannon, there was a little of a statue of him on the campus. They continued to have a very close relationship, but I think these three gentlemen came up with the idea that if they offered to change the name and include Cannon in it, that the purse would be open much wider. And obviously the purse at the Cannon Foundation was extremely well fed. The issue came up as to whether or not the Baptist State Convention had the authority required to approve the name change. And the issue went to the Baptist State Convention, Winston-Salem, and they had a vote, and there was a large crowd at the convention. It was in the Orange Joel Coliseum, and there was a lot of people there, as was frequently true with the Baptist State Convention. A lady who had been a professor at Wingate for, I believe, close to 50 years, got up and made a speech opposing the name change. She was a traditionalist. She obviously loved Wingate. She loved the small college atmosphere and the kind of things that you found at Wingate. And she made a very convincing speech why the name should not be changed. Following her, Mr. Harris took the podium, and he spoke in favor of it. And obviously his speech was much more progressive. He had a great vision for Wingate and what it could be, and he thought this was an essential step in that process. Ironically, Mr. Harris walked off of the stage onto the convention floor, suffered a heart attack, and died. A very sad ending to the program. But the vote was held, and the issue, name change, was rejected by the Baptist State Convention. That was sort of the beginning of what I saw as a long-term struggle for the Baptist colleges to free themselves from the control by the Baptist State Convention. The ironic thing was that the Baptist State Convention, I believe, gave Wingate somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million a year. It could have been plus or minus a little. And Wingate's budget, even at that early period, was in the $40 million range. So the Baptists really were not footing the bill, which I guess was a little bit of how the relationship had developed. The churches in the early days were a pretty significant part of the funds flowing into the Baptist schools. But anyway, this issue was one that was simmering all the time. The Baptist State Convention had the authority to appoint, I believe, 5 of the trustees on each of the boards. The number might be different. At least they had a significant impact on the board. It was not that the schools did not want to have ministers on the board. It was that the ministers were not a source of very much in the way of funds, and many times did not bring a lot to the table in terms of where to get funds. The schools were struggling to find philanthropists or businessmen that had businessmen or women, and there were several women involved that had access to funds either themselves or through their acquaintances, or that was sort of the underlying struggle. This struggle went on for quite a while. In fact, Wingate did not separate from the Baptist State Convention until 2006, 7, 8, 9, somewhere in that period of time that they finally came to an agreement and sort of cut the strings there, and the Baptists no longer had to provide funds for the budget. Yeah, I began my second 4-year term at Wingate. At that point, I was given a chairmanship of a committee, and the committee that I was assigned to was business affairs. A good friend of mine, a fellow trustee, Mr. Charles Wilson, who lived in Charlotte, had been with Celanese, and at some point in time, I think had been with GE, as I recall, and he had become the chairman of the board. And in the first year of my second term, that was what we were doing. He was the chairman, and I was chairman of the Business Affairs Committee, and we worked pretty closely together. We began talking about expanding Wingate, but at the same time, as we approached the second year of my second term, I became the chairman, and Tom moved on to some other assignment, and Dr. Courts decided that he was going to leave Wingate. He had an offer to go to Florida Atlantic, I believe was the name of it, in West Palm Beach. Might have been Palm Beach Atlantic. Actually, I'm a little bit, memory's a little sly. I think it probably was Palm Beach Atlantic. He called me and told me that he was resigning, and I obviously expressed my sadness that he would be leaving. Certainly was not any issues between him and Wingate that would cause him to leave that I was aware of, and I never discovered any later. He was in the process of building the new administration building, which was really an upgrade for the campus. It wound up being named after a gentleman by the name of Seagrove, who had been a significant donor over the years. I think he lived locally there in Union County and was involved in turkey farming, and I think the Seagrove smoked turkeys that people bought for Thanksgiving and Christmas was from his company. But at any rate, Dr. Paul decided to leave, and immediately we named someone as an acting president. I need to get that name and the position, and began moving forward, certainly trying to keep the school on an even keel. One issue that Paul had dealt with that became something that we had not expected, I guess, he had negotiated with Senator Helms to contribute his papers and to Wingate and establish a Helms Library or a Helms Center. The senator and Dr. Paul had done this in a very professional manner, but a lot of other people on the board had no idea what the details were. And of course, Senator Helms was a very busy person, so getting to the point of tying those things down was a pretty tricky bit. That particular problem sort of fell in my lap as a challenge or a surprise to me. I did not know of any of the details, had not been involved in any of it. And then I began to be involved in trying to decide things like, now that we have the papers, where are we going to put them, where are we going to house the Helms Center, all of those kind of questions. And the Helms group was a sort of a separate group. They called it Helms Center Board, I guess, but it included a lot of the people that had been the senator's support in his political life. Some of them had rather different ideas than we did about what role the Helms Center should carry in Wingate as a school. And they came to the board of Wingate with a proposal, I guess really came to the executive committee with a proposal that they build a building in what's called the quadrangle, which was right in the center of the campus. It was to be a $5 million building. Remember, that's back in the 90s, early 90s, so $5 million was probably a $10 million building today or more than that. But they had drawn up the plans, and it was sort of designed around the concept that was in the federal building in Philadelphia in colonial days. A couple of the people on the Helms board were a little bit radical, I guess, but anyway, they were pushing very hard to put that building in the quadrangle, which, in my view at least, would have made them a dominant factor on the Wingate campus. We were also at that time in the process of finding and hiring a new president. We had a committee that was working on that, and we had people coming in for interviews, so there was quite a bit going on. The issue with the Helms Center sort of kept us from giving the attention that we should have to it. I wound up staying in the chairmanship for 2 years, maybe 3 at that point in time. The search committee found a person that they thought was an excellent candidate. He was the dean of the law school at Yale University, and we had him down, interviewed him, wined and dined him, all the things you do when you're trying to select a president. And we thought he had agreed, and I believe he had agreed to take the job. And then something came up. Perhaps he made some discovery he didn't like, or for some reason he backed out. And we sort of had to restart the search process. Ultimately, we wound up hiring Dr. Jerry McGee, who was the fundraising guy for Furman University, the development guy. Jerry was a native of Roberdale, North Carolina. His father died when he was fairly young, and his mother remarried, and his stepfather certainly raised him, but his grandfather lived in the same area too, so he had some help from his grandfather, I guess, along the way. But Jerry was an athlete. He played baseball. I think he got a summer job with Klopman Mills and played on their baseball team, and wound up with a scholarship at East Carolina University. He and J.B. Davis were teammates at East Carolina. Jerry, in addition to being a baseball player, over the years had become a referee in the college football scene, and he ultimately refereed in a couple of Rose Bowl games. It was very successful in that role. But he also was a good fundraiser, and ultimately, although we had not had him on our original list, he ultimately turned out to be a stronger candidate than anyone else we had seen. And we hired Jerry, and he did a wonderful job for some 25, 30 years. I'll have to look up to see exactly how long he was there. He did retire about 10 years ago, and lives in Charlotte. He had an unfortunate experience sometime in the 90s. He and his wife were vacationing in the Caribbean, and she had an aneurysm, a stroke, which took her life ultimately. That was a little bit of a very, very hard lick. Took a lot out of Jerry for some period of time. He ultimately married another lady whose husband had passed away, and they've been a very happy couple since that time. Jerry was a dreamer, and he dreamed up some very good things that Wingate accomplished in terms of a new pharmacy school, a physician's assistant school, PA school, a physical therapy school, and Jerry was out there getting people to back it, and he found a backer for the pharmacy school and the medical school building. Overall, did a great job. He liked people liked him, and he continued to do his referee job. But at any rate, Jerry came in, and he really was the one who solved the situation with Senator Helms' group and worked out a compromise. There was the Bank of America or NCNB building, I guess, across the street from the campus. The bank was abandoning it, and Jerry found some way to get control of it. And the Helms Center wound up there with the library and their administrative center for the Helms Foundation. So that issue was put to bed. But my term, which was supposed to be a 1-year term as chairman, stretched out to a good bit further. But I got a good bit of education. I got to interact with some rather significant people. Got to know Senator Helms reasonably well. I did serve on the Helms group for a while because the bylaw said that the chairman of Wingate was automatically a member of the Helms board. So I spent some time with those fellows and got to know them. That was not necessarily one of my more pleasant experiences, but I did it. Moving forward, I had a couple more terms as chairman. I think all told that I served as 5 years as chairman, not sequentially, because once Jerry came aboard, I moved on, took time off from the chairmanship and took a sabbatical from the board. I assume they did change the sabbatical policy later on, and you could serve consecutive terms. But I continued to be involved in the executive committee and in many things that were going on. Somewhat later, we had a little skirmish with the Sachs group, and had to work our way through that to get everything that Sachs wanted us for continued accreditation. That worked out fine. We also had a branch in Matthews, and quite a bit later in my time with the board, we got involved in deciding what we wanted to do in terms of that branch. The board almost came to the conclusion that they were going to build a building in Matthews, that in fact they bought property. And then I guess after looking at that a bit further, they decided to go into the development down in South Charlotte, and I'll need to find the name of that too. And in a rented property, and they had an MBA school there, and they also had some extension classes that people could. And then another project that occurred during my tenure on the board was to put a school in Hendersonville. And there they were working with the local hospital in Hendersonville. And you actually could attend pharmacy school in Hendersonville. So Wingate has continued to flourish. In 2012, I asked not to be renamed to the board or reassigned to the board because I was reaching the age that it was becoming a burden for me, the drive over there, and if you spend a lot of time. Also at that point in time I was having my knees replaced, so I had a good excuse. But I've stayed in touch with them. Jerry McGee, Dr. McGee, retired, and I served on the selection committee for his replacement. His replacement was a gentleman by the name of Rhett Brown, Dr. Rhett Brown, who was a country boy from down in South Carolina, came to Wingate to play football, and was also in the Navy Reserves and got called up during Desert Storm and with the Seabees and went to Kuwait. He came back, finished his bachelor's program, did an MBA at Wingate, and then by remotely did a doctoral program at the University of Alabama, I believe. He has been doing a great job at Wingate. He is one of the people that I thought highly of. Rhett had a great concern for the fact that college tuition seemed to be growing at a rate that was more than students would be able to afford, and he was always looking for some way to make education more affordable at Wingate. Obviously, that's a very difficult problem because you're always looking for a way to improve the level of education that people are getting. And the other thing is, from a competitive standpoint, the big schools that have tremendous endowments present some competition for the better students that makes it pretty difficult for a small student. Speaking of the endowment, I think over the years that I was with Wingate, on the Wingate board, their endowment grew by about fourfold. As I recall, when I went on the board, the endowment was in the low $20 million, and I think it's probably approaching $100 million at this point. So a lot of good work has been done. The other thing that I had an opportunity to do was serve as chairman of a committee that looked at whether or not Wingate should have a law school. And it turned out that we decided that a law school was too expensive, and that really surprised me, I guess, because I didn't realize that you had to have such a vast library and a lot of things if you had a law school. At least ultimately that committee decided not to recommend that Wingate have a law school. One of the people who served with on that committee was a former Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina. I believe he's from Wadesboro, Charles Taylor. I got to know him a little bit. The other interesting thing that happened at a Wingate board meeting pretty early in my time on the board was that Jimmy Carter was a guest of the Wingate board at a dinner in Wingate and later spoke to us. So I met Jimmy Carter there also. Several other people that obviously you didn't normally have a chance to meet. I met the head of the Secretary General of the United Nations came to speak at Wingate once. A black lady who was Secretary of State came to speak, and I had an opportunity to invite Jim and Faye Kimmel to attend that event with me. So Wingate gave me a lot of opportunities to meet people that were considered important in the world, and in most cases they were very important. It was a great experience for me, and ultimately Wingate awarded me with a Doctor of Humane Letters degree in 2012. So I had a fondness for Wingate. I tried to do a good job, and I think that I probably met most of their expectations for that period of time.